quick intro. Today, what are we doing, Rokker? What's on the agenda?
We are going to be touring, if possible, the entire National Museum of the United States Air Force. That will be hard to do. We have 360 aircraft here to look at. I'm probably not going to pay attention to a good few of those, but we'll see how much I can get through. There are 4 hangars here. First hangar is what we're in right now. This is part of it. This is the World War I gallery. Next will be the World War II gallery, then Korea, Vietnam, Cold War, and then we'll finish with the Presidential Research and Space Gallery.
And one thing to note when it comes to stream quality and stuff, I understand it's going to be a little bit lower than what you guys are used to, but what we're going to do is we're going to stay stationary for certain parts, just so we can give you a good look at stuff and also give you commentary while we're going along. This is mainly due to, obviously, internet issues, being inside a hangar and stuff like that, so it's not always the best.
It's just a giant metal Faraday cage.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not the easiest thing to do.
Yeah. I'm going to wipe off the camera right here, so ignore my giant finger. I was just looking at those lights, and I'm like, those are a little more blurry than they should be.
Yeah.
All right.
Will I
so
be
we ready to
later?
Get started?
Yeah, let's go. Let's have a look.
All right. So this right here, I'm going to cover this a lot later, but this is the Caproni Ca26. It was a World War I bomber. It is a tri-engine. It has an engine on each of these pylons here. And then it has an engine on the back right here. And then you stick the gunner on top of that. I can't show that from the other side, so I just wanted to point that hilarity out right there. I do think it's just hilarious that you'd have a guy standing on top of the engine for a 2-3 hour flight, you know, deafened,
Did
crying.
this was for combat or just concept?
Yeah, the Ca26s did see combat. I think a little bit of everyone used them. I believe the French had some, the Americans had some, obviously the Italians had some. If we come over here, actually, I'm going to ignore some of these planes first. This right here is the oldest piece in the museum. This is a piece of a Confederate balloon from the American Civil War used in 1863. I like that piece because it shows that the museum is interested in more than just planes and more than just the official Air Force proper. It's all about the history of flight. We even have pieces of the, this is a Wright-made bicycle by the Wright brothers, who obviously invented the airplane, and we also have one of their wind tunnels over here. If we come over here, this is a replica of the first aircraft that the military ever bought, the Wright Flyer, 1909. It was built by the Wright brothers. It was purchased in 1909, and it's on display here. As you can see, there's no wheels. It's a pretty standard 4-cylinder engine in the middle there. You got a propeller on each side. And this was used for artillery spotting and training, as well as this one over here, which was the second airplane the Air Force ever purchased in 1910, I believe. Then if we come over here, those are both replicas made in, I believe, the 60s. So that means the oldest plane in the museum here is this plane right here, which is a Blériot monoplane. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm not French. But this is the oldest plane we have here, is built in 1911 by a farmer who was looking at pictures of an actual Blériot monoplane. He's like, I can make one of those. So he gathered all the pictures he could and built that. And it flew. And then in the 1960s, he donated it to the Air Force Museum, and that's how it got here. If we come over here, this is a standard J-1. This was the training aircraft for the Air Force in World War I. I believe this one was built in 1916. And these were used quite extensively as trainer aircraft because the Americans did need to learn to fly as we entered the war. We have some engines over here. We got this big engine right here is a Stortavant 5A. And this giant thing can only put out 140 horsepower, which I always find that just
God
crazy
damn.
how far it's always crazy how far we've come
Yeah.
over the years. I mean, an engine this size now would put out what, probably 300 or 400 at least.
Oh, definitely.
Probably a lot more, especially if you threw a turbo on there. And that's what a lot of planes are working with by the start of World War I. You have that engine over there. This one over here is a 50 horsepower engine. These are just sort of what you see at the start of the war, even pre-war. And that was one of the biggest improvements you could make was those engines, because, you know, you're working with 130 miles an hour. If you can pump out 150 miles an hour, you've got a fast plane, right? This is one of the first planes that the Americans used in the war, namely as expeditionary forces and as volunteers. This is the SPAD 7. As you can see, it's got a big old radiator in the front here. You got a machine gun up top. These are built by everyone that could build them. Piano companies would have made these. Little bit of everyone. This one.
The swing of the war economy again.
Yep.
Total war.
Exactly. As you can see, this has the Native American head on the back here. This was a standard symbol that you'd see on a lot of American aircraft fighting in France.
Just to ask you guys, is the audio okay, by the way?
504K, which was a
Just let me know if you want it higher or low. Among
the British and Canadians. And the Americans used a few of these as well. They actually just restored this, and it actually is a perfect example of how good their restoration jobs are, because I swear it looks like it's just new off of the production line. You can see how just shiny it is. You can see all the fabric's been replaced entirely. It is a beautiful job done by the restoration team. We actually have one of the largest fabric storage places in the world, because we have to store fabric for all these planes to try and restore them and keep them going, and, you know, just making everything look good.
Do any of these biplanes fly?
Nothing in the museum flies anymore. There are a lot of things that probably would be in some flying condition if we wanted them to be, but the museum's entire job is preservation. So normally, you know, we don't want to fly them.
They're not in flying condition, but they're super well preserved, so they could be.
Exactly, yeah. Like, I believe the Memphis Belle, when you see that, the engines on that have actually been run before they were put on the plane. Like, they ran them up, got some hours on them, and then put them on the plane.
I suppose if you are some crafty farmer, you can build one of these if you have enough inspiration and the model.
Oh, absolutely. Although you'd probably be better off just finding a kit plane that you could make. This here is a Newport, forgive me, I don't remember off the top of my head, a Newport 28. So this would have been an early World War I aircraft that you would have seen. Again, the Air Force would have used these, the French would have used these, the British used a few of these. These were replaced by later SPADs. They did have a favorable kill-to-death ratio, so they were considered, good planes. But eventually, their lack of ability when it came to dive speeds, and their lack of ability when it came to energy maintaining and everything, eventually pushed it out of service. I always find it interesting because you have the two guns mounted here rather than on the top or anything like that. I don't know why. Maybe someone in chat does. But I always find that interesting compared to the normal, mounting you'd see on a lot of these aircraft.
It could just be maybe a visibility thing.
Probably. I mean, that is a pretty low top wing, so I wouldn't be surprised
Yeah.
if that was some aspect of it. If we look up here, we have a replica Fokker DR1 about to make a dive on top of you. This is painted up as an ace who actually moved to America after the war, and he decided to donate all of his trophies to the Air Force Museum. His name was Arthur Ron. You can see a lot of his trophies and medals here. So, as a token of appreciation, they painted up our Fokker DR1 as the one he flew, which is fascinating to me.
It is. Well, good choice, I guess.
It is worth noting that is a replica because there are none left. I believe the last one was actually destroyed in bombing raids in World War II. So any Fokker DR1 you see is always going to be a replica. This here is our replica Sopwith Camel, which is obviously a very famous aircraft of World War I. It was a successful aircraft, but I think an important note about it is it was very maneuverable, which is to mean it's very unstable. And these actually killed about as many pilots in accidents as it did in actual, like, getting down to in battle.
The true British
Which
way.
is, yes, which is less than ideal, to say the least. But I do love the Camel. It just looks like the quintessential World War I aircraft, you know? Tiny, these wonderful canted biplane wings. I just love the Camel. Over here, this is a German attack aircraft known as the Halberstadt CL4. It has an inline engine, which was very uncommon for a lot of planes in World War I. This was an attacker. There's only 3 of these left in the world, as far as I know. One is here, one is in the Smithsonian, and one is in, I think it's Germany. Might be London. I can't remember which. I haven't looked that up in a long time. But you can see it has a pilot in the front, it has a machine gunner in the back, and then it has a, well, they actually removed it, but you would have a rack over here. You can actually see this little bit right here. There'd be a rack on there, and you'd have grenades that you could chuck down on people as you flew by. So, a pretty wonderful attacker.
Crazy to think that this is an attacker. God damn it.
Yeah. And I mean, you can see some, like, you got a big chunky engine here, not a lot of visibility to shoot people from the front. It's got some attacker elements, but it is still very much in that learning phase of World War I, where we didn't know
of course,
quite how to make planes work. You know, we didn't understand quite what role they'd be filling and how to fill those roles. Over here is our SPAD 13 C1. This one actually was made by a piano factory in 1918. I believe it never saw combat officially, but it is painted up as Eddie Rickenbacker's plane. It's pretty much just an upgrade of the SPADs, like the SPAD 7 we saw back earlier in the museum. You see some more aerodynamic shaping on it. You see that they started to get a little bit more of a feel for how to make planes. This one had a wonderful dive capability, etc. It was just a further improvement on the dogfighting capabilities of the war. If we come over here, well, I always love this picture because it just shows the how great, how important the artillery spotting aspect of these planes was, because you could turn a fort that looked like an actual fort at one point into this lunar wasteland of craters.
pretty much. This
Yeah.
looked like a Moth field. Poor boys.
Yep. French lady made this flag and gave it to the 91st Aero Squadron as they moved into a German airfield after the war. We have a carrier pigeon over here, with a note that it would have carried. You got a little capsule of things it would have carried right here. We have some artillery pieces. We have some gas masks and face masks that you'd wear as a pilot. Because we were just starting to get into high altitude, so it was pretty much just pack up as much as you can with, wool and covering, and then you got to go.
Mm.
We have a telescope sight right here. Some World War I uniform pieces for what you would wear as you went to those high altitudes. We have, this is actually a really interesting piece, if it's still up here. Yes. So Quentin Roosevelt was the son of Teddy Roosevelt. He participated in the war. He flew a reconnaissance aircraft, and he was ultimately shot down. The first grave they made for him put up this cross right here as a grave marker. Eventually they went back, took down that cross, and moved it to an official graveyard. And when that happened, this cross was preserved and brought to the museum, which I think is really fascinating. Moving on, is there anything anyone wants me to slow down and check out, or?
Let's see. No, they're just really commenting on the. Well, someone said, my trypophobia while looking at the battlefield picture.
That's great. This right here, we're sort of getting into the very late and post-war area. This right here is the Kettering Bug. You can technically call it the first cruise missile.
Oh, the
in the world.
decals. Oh, the decals. Have a look at the decals. Or the
Of course it is. This is what happens when you start making videos about decals, Tech. You get all the decal nerds up here. So these are different squadrons, aero squadrons in World War I. As you can see, they're all numbered, so I don't know if you can read them, though. So you got the 1st, the 8th, the 9th. 1st, 8th, 9th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 17th. I'm trying to point in third person, so this is tricky. 20, 22, 24, 25, 27, 28, 41, 49, 50th, 85th, 88th, 90th, 91st, 93rd, 94, 95. Actually, I'll just get closer. I'm not going to read all those off.
Yeah, it looks good. The quality.
Yeah.
That's
You can read them from here.
It's a lot of variables.
And if you want to picture it, yeah, they're pretty good.
I'm part of the 90 Donkey Squadron.
I like this one because it's a little terrier and it says "Who said rats," which those little terriers were originally for hunting rats, so I find that.
Oh well, you mentioned it once, Tech, right?
Yeah, we used to go ratting with the little terriers.
Yeah. So I find that entertaining because it's something that probably was a lot more common back then than it is now, at least in everyday life. But yeah, I find that to be an entertaining idea. But yeah, you can see there's some great variety, and honestly, these are beautiful works of art for each of the squadrons. It'd be really cool to see some of those War Thunder actually. But
probably
World War I stuff bad. War Thunder no like. So over here, this is the Kettering Bug, the first cruise missile in the world. It was also one of the first vehicles to use autopilot, because you would set it up, you would just point in a direction and say, "Hey, maintain this heading." After a certain point, turn off the engine, and then it would just fall to the ground. It wouldn't see much use until idea wouldn't see much use until World War II, when the Germans started using the V1s. And you can see that this rack here would fall away, and then the cruise missile would fly off.
good old bomb, or is it also a torpedo? What? It's only a regular bomb.
It looks like a torpedo, but it's a bomb. They called it an aerial torpedo, but it was in the end a bomb, and it just had the bomb section right here is the warhead.
I see.
I never really realized the technology was so early. Like, this was First World War, right?
Yeah, the first
Holy
autopilot
shit.
was like 1910, 1911, which is just insane to think about. Up here is the last major German aircraft of the war. It was feared. It was super powerful. It's the Fokker D7, and probably the ugliest paint scheme they ever made in the war. It's just a bunch of dark. It's like someone took a pastel and was like, "That's too bright. Let's use the same colors and then darken them up a bit." But it was a feared aircraft. It was a very powerful aircraft, but ultimately it came too late in the war to make a difference for Germany, along with all the other problems they had. If we look on the ground here, we have a King Bugatti engine made by Bugatti. Well, this one was manufactured by Duesenberg, but, you know, it was a Bugatti design. And this, by this point of the war, this is like late war to the end of the war, we went from that 30 horsepower engine we had seen to this one, which was 410 horsepower, which is a pretty big leap, you know?
Yeah.
And that sort of was the war drove a lot of that aircraft engine innovation throughout the 4-year period that it was going on. This over here is a de Havilland DH4.
Did you press something?
Hmm?
The screen's grey for me, or is it my fault?
It's great.
Oh, hold on, let me try doing that. How about now?
It's just loading.
Uh-oh. Have I run out of luck on the whole connection? Here, let me try disconnecting.
Saved.
It's working?
There. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So this is a de Havilland DH4. It is a this one is done up in Border Patrol, not camo, Border Patrol skin, I guess you could say, livery. And it's done up as Border Patrol because in 1919, just after the war ended, America was having a lot of trouble with Pancho Villa and his bandit raiders coming in from Mexico. So we had to use Border Patrol aircraft, and this is one of the planes that was brought up to use as a Border Control aircraft to keep Pancho Villa from raiding Texan and New Mexican towns. So I find that to be an interesting little aircraft. It's the first non-World War or post-World War I aircraft in the museum. If we look over here, here's that Caproni Ca26 we saw at the start. Here's the other two engines that it has. Here's this smiley guy right here, just chilling out, all happy, acting all cool. As you can see, it did have a gunner position up front as well as in the back. They still hadn't figured out the ideal gunner positions, but they're starting to get there. This is a rare aircraft. I don't know if I haven't been able to find any other museums that has one, but I don't know if it's just not documented or anything. But as far as I can tell, this is the only one left in the world. It was used by Italy and France. And America used a few of them as well. Over here, this is America's first attempt at manufacturing its own aircraft. This is called the Lusak 11. This was it came very late war. I believe they started designing it in 1917. After the war was over, it started being used as a test aircraft. And this is one of the first aircraft to have a pressurized hull. They built a bubble around the cockpit and just sort of pressurized it, which I find fascinating. It's also one of the best examples in the museum of the old radiator configuration. As you can see here, there's a radiator right above the pilot, which is the worst place to put one, because if that radiator gets shot, you've got a freshly steamed pilot.
Oh no.
Jesus.
Yeah. So you better hope no one ever shoots at your plane, basically. You better hope that no hose ever breaks or anything like that. As you can see, there's new interesting streamlining attempts done on this. You can see how they've sort of curved the edges here and they made a more airfoil shape. So they were really starting to get a handle on how to streamline everything and get a real sort of plane going. And also there's a lot of metal construction on that aircraft, which was starting to become more and more popular. Over here, this is a replica. None of these were ever preserved. This is called the Martin MB-2. It was America's first indigenously designed bomber. As you can see, it could carry a big old bomb down there. I believe that's a 2,000 pounder. I could be wrong on that. These were used in a famous thing called the Mitchell trials or the battleship trials. And the idea there was the Navy wasn't as concerned as the Army was about aircraft. They thought there's no way a bomber could reliably hit a moving ship. There's no way you could do anything to them. So they decided to test the limits of that and push it. Billy Mitchell, he's considered the godfather of the Air Force. He's like, no, I think my bombers can hit your ships. And they're like, all right, fine, go for it. So they set a battleship, the Ostfriesland. They started moving it along in the water and seeing if the bombers could hit it. They got a hit. They sunk it. Navy brass wasn't as happy. Billy Mitchell was a bit of a dick, so he rubbed it in their faces and ultimately got demoted for it. And for that, amongst other reasons, he was court-martialed. However, after the fact, posthumously, he was actually promoted, and he's recognized as sort of the father or godfather of the Air Force. Over here we have a Ford Model T ambulance, which is very important during the war. You needed ambulances to get people away from the front lines, away from plane crashes, to help get them to an actual hospital. Because back then, every minute really did count on whether or not you could save someone's life.
And the Model T very important to the automobile industry, right?
Oh yeah, the Model T was one of the first majorly mass-produced and first mass-purchased vehicles in the world.
Public.
Yeah, exactly. Affordable to the public. It only cost $300 at the time, I believe, and that would be about, I think, $4,000 or $5,000 today. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't bad. It was affordable. And it set up the American auto industry to be the titan that it is today. This over here is a trainer aircraft called the Pt-1 Trustee. It was made by Consolidated. It's got a really hideous engine layout up there. As you can see, it's just wide open. It's boxy. I've never been a fan of this plane. But it's a cool little trainer. Over here, we're going to start getting into the inner warfighters. These are some of the first aircraft given the pursuit designation. So, the P1, P2, P-51, etc., etc. This one here is a gorgeous piece called the P6 E. It is the Hawk. It was made by Curtis, who made, obviously, the P6 Hawk, the P36 Hawk, etc., etc. This is, I don't know, I love this plane. It just has a really Art Deco feel to it. It had a 430 horsepower engine. So it was starting to use those really big, really powerful engines like the, I believe this is a Curtis D12 engine. So it's also a lot of metal construction. It was one of the first aircraft where you start seeing a lot of metal construction to it.
The paint scheme is nice.
What was that?
The paint scheme is nice.
Oh yeah, it's a wonderful paint scheme. I love the black and white leaves you got going on, and then You got a wonderful little decal on the back here, since I know people want to see that. It's like a weird hawk, I think.
Is it a dove?
What was it?
I think so.
It looks like a dove, but it's got feathery legs here,
Mm.
and they look like talons. So I'm wondering if it's some kind of hawk. Over here is one of Boeing's first aircraft for the military. This is the Boeing P-12E. As you can see, it's the war between inline engines and radials has begun. This is another one of the first metal aircraft that the Air Force ever used. They built about 360 of these things, and it was the entry of Boeing who became a long-standing titan in the Air Force industry, you could say. If we come over here, this is the Kellett Auto Gyro. So just so everyone knows, because I don't know who all does and doesn't know this, an auto gyro is not a helicopter. The blade at the top is not powered. It actually auto rotates, which means that the force of wind flowing over it causes the airfoils to move forwards and backwards as it comes along here. And that creates a very low speed lift capability. So before helicopters, you could use this for scouting. I know the Japanese would stick depth charges on these and try and use them against submarines. It was an idea that was explored. The Air Force decided not to use it. The Japanese actually then built these things and turned them into their own aircraft that they use for artillery spotting and maritime patrol. So that's an interesting little piece.
What a weird concept.
Oh, absolutely. It's an insane concept. This over here is a P-26 pea shooter. I'm sure this is one of the first aircraft that people recognize as being from War Thunder. It's got a wonderful little paint scheme to it from Wheeler Field. These would have been used by the Philippines in the war. They were retired by the Air Force by the time war really started to break out. But as you can see, it's one of the first all-metal constructions. It's got metal wings, metal body. And it also is one of the first monoplanes. As you can see, one wing, nothing on top, nothing below. If we come over here, this is the first premium vehicle from War Thunder that you can see in the museum.
Hello there.
This is our B-10 bomber. It has the weird little duck nose up here that just really looks ugly. It's not even a duck nose. It's more of a swallow nose, I guess, or a sparrow nose. But you got the weird ball turret up there. That was the first time they had, not a ball turret. I don't know what you would call that. A dome turret, I guess. It was the first time they had attempted that idea, or one of the first times. This is actually a gift from Argentina. Argentina was still flying these back in the 70s. And when they retired it, they're like, hey, we heard you've been looking for one of these for your museum. Would you like that? So they gave it to the museum as a symbol of goodwill. You would have a gunner back here. You have the pilot up there. And you have the turret up there. This was the first all-metal mono-wing bomber that the Air Force used.
Were they still using it as a bomber in the 70s?
I think it was probably a training aircraft in Argentina by that point in time. It's also the first aircraft in the museum to use the Wright 1820 here, which would go on to be used by bombers throughout the war, including the B-24 and B-17. If we look up here, we have a bunch of trainer aircraft. This one right here has a swastika on it because it is, in fact, a German trainer glider. And this is late 1930s in the U.S. America hasn't entered the war. We're still years away from it, but it is still important to note that the Germans were starting to train up the Luftwaffe. The Air Force was just starting to learn how to train up their people for the newly created U.S. Army Air Forces and Air Corps. We've got the O-52L up here. The O was an observation aircraft. That designation was retired before the war. As you can see, there's a lot of room to look out those windows there.
God damn.
Yeah. If we come over here, this guy, this big chunky monkey here, is the O-47B. It was not a great plane. It was an observation aircraft, but even then, it wasn't that great at doing that. It did have holes in the bottom for both cameras and looking out of. But ultimately, it was just a big, bulky, slow aircraft, and the observation designation was retired shortly after. Over here is one of my favorite mannequin displays in the museum. I'm trying to get my hand out of the frame. Here, let's try this. This is our Pt-1, which was a basic trainer. This would have been one of the first aircraft that pilots would have learned to fly on after the primary trainers, which are these guys right up here. So this guy's having a really bad day. He just crashed his Bt-1 through this fence here. The mechanics are going like, "Who's this dumbass?" And then he's getting his ass chewed out by a CO right here. Needless to say, this would have happened more than once in a plane like this, so it had to be a bit rugged, had to be a bit tough. But these were the planes that most people got trained on if you joined the Air Force as a pilot.
I think Hans is right. This is a soft landing by game standards.
Any landing you can walk away from is a good landing, right?
Yes.
And at least it didn't flip over upside down like it does in War Thunder. It didn't do a backflip upside down. So hey, you could definitely repair on the airfield from this one. Actually, I'm going to skip the Hurricane really quickly. This right up here is the SE-5E. It is a variant of the SE-5A, which was actually a really exceptional fighter during World War I. It's not as well recognized as the Sopwith Camel, but many pilots considered it to be just as good. And it was just as effective as the Sopwith Camel. It was British made. And I always like to pay attention to it because you don't hear as much about this as you do about the Sopwith Camels and about the, about the Newports and the Spads. But it is a wonderful aircraft, in my opinion. We also have a de Havilland Tiger Moth, which was the main British trainer in World War II, their primary trainer. It served for many years, and you can still find a lot of these flying today. They are well-built aircraft, well-made, and they just fly really well. So it's always a fun little aircraft. Down here, obviously, we have a Hawker Hurricane. This is a Hurricane Mark II-A. As you can see, it has 4 machine guns on this side, 4 on the other. Those would have been 707s, also known as the Vickers machine guns. Yeah, 7.7s, not 707s. What am I thinking? This is actually painted up as an Eagle Squadron aircraft, which was a British squadron that American pilots would fly in as volunteers. So these are the volunteer forces of Americans in England before the war started. And that's all about all I got to say about that. It's a wonderful aircraft. I'm happy to have it here. There's not a ton of Hurricanes to be seen in the U.S. We come over here. This is our Holocaust exhibit at the museum. Originally, Dayton used to have its own Holocaust museum, but when it eventually ran out of funding and they didn't get enough visitors, donated their collection to the Air Force Museum. We do have items from the Holocaust. This was a prisoner at Buchenwald. We have items taken from prisoners. This is the jacket of one of the liberators of Which one did he loot? Mauthausen was, I believe, what he liberated. It is always a humbling display to come through. It's always a important display to check out. They also talk about prisoners of war in this exhibit as well. Anyone who basically had their lives or their livelihood taken away by the Nazis.